Mercedes are finally back. Well, that is what we would love to say. But unfortunately, that is far from happening anytime soon. Lewis Hamilton grabbed a surprise pole at Hungary, edging Max Verstappen on the timing sheets by just 3/1000ths of a second. That did feed much needed optimism into the team, but on Sunday's race, Hamilton was not even able to hang on to a podium finish due to Max's rocket ship run and with good pace exhibited by the McLarens. This is terrible news for Mercedes, as when one customer team is silenced, it seems though another customer team is now ahead of them in the pecking order. Right after the Hungarian Grand Prix, heads at Mercedes revealed some statements, which does not bode well for the Silver Arrows this season. Let's first talk about how the race week unfolded for the Silver Arrows around Budapest, for us to understand why the said statements are real bad news for Mercedes. The weekend started very differently, as some of the top teams, including Mercedes, did not run cars for the entirety of the practice times. It was down to two factors, one being the weather and the other being the new tire allocation system which was tested out last weekend. Less tires were given out to the teams by Pirelli, meaning teams did less running, and used as much as only one tire set for both sessions on Friday to keep the team's strategic options open for race day. Lewis Hamilton and George Russell regarded the car to be at its worst peak around the Hungarian circuit. But with some overnight work done back at the simulator by Mick, the team was able to find a better setup for the car, which was reflected on set as FP3 in qualifying. While qualifying went horribly wrong for George Russell, who qualified P18 after a late run call from his team, Lewis Hamilton produced one of those stellar laps to pit pole from the reigning world champion. While some hoped that to translate into a good race performance, that did not materialize. The W14 on high fuel load was miles away from the pace-setting Red Bull, which was not a surprise. But the Mercedes was slower than the McLarens as well, partly down to the team having to manage temperature issues on the 7-time world champion's car, but also down to the car's balance itself. On high fuel loads, the Mercedes car was about 2 to 3 tenths slower than the McLarens. But as the fuel load went down, the Mercedes car came alive, showcasing much better pace than the McLarens. After dropping down to P4 from pole at the race start due to Hamilton's poor getaway, he was able to solidify his P4 position by overtaking Oscar Piastri around the latter stages of the Grand Prix. Hamilton finished 39 seconds behind race winner Max Verstappen, which equates to about half a second per lap of race pace deficit, which is around where the Silver Arrows expected themselves to be. When talking about this matter, the 7-time world champion went on to add, the initial getaway wasn't the worst I've ever had. It wasn't as good as Max's start, I had wheel spin. Then Max was on the inside, he ran me wide and I got done by the two McLarens. Like 2015 when I fell back from first. Then I didn't have the pace to keep up with the guys. The balance of the car was awful on the first stint, a lot of understeer. Bit by bit, the car started to become more drivable and the last stint was much better. If we had the pace we had at the end, we'd have been much better. Still taking the positives from yesterday, great for everyone. It was spectacular. We have a lot of work to do. We are a long way off beating Red Bull in a race, and now we're behind the McLarens. That's one part of the story. George Russell started the race from 18th on the grid, but did a mega job, recovering up to 6th, benefiting from the penalty Charles Leclerc had due to speeding in the pit lane. After the race, the Brit talked about his race and what he thinks about the current pecking order. He first mentioned about his recovery drive, mentioning that the W14 on his hands was fast on race day, but also did mention that the McLarens were a small step ahead of them. The car was really quick. This is one of my favorite circuits, one of my best circuits, and as a team we generally go really well here. So it's no surprise how quick we were today. McLaren in all honesty are maybe one small step ahead. Probably more so on Lando Norris' side, but I've been really impressed with Oscar this year. McLaren came to Hungary expecting a dismal performance, but another straight podium was not in their books for sure. That is not good news for Mercedes. At the Hungarian Grand Prix, McLaren had exceptional pace on high fuel loads, and again demonstrated its ability to fire up its tires. But the Mercedes car was exceptional on the latter stages of the Grand Prix, which is a positive for the team to take into account. With Hamilton and Russell's finishing positions, Mercedes took home 20 crucial points, which was the third highest, with McLaren continuing their run of excellent form with another podium and a P5 for Oscar Piastri. Despite this, team boss Toto Wolff insisted that Mercedes had the second quickest car behind Red Bull, as he went on to add, I think we had the second quickest car. If you look at the speed profile, also where George came from, but we just didn't monetize on it. Having said that, you see what Verstappen is doing and that needs to be the target, and it's far off at the moment. Ted Kravitz of Sky Sports was quite shocked to hear that comment from Toto Wolff, where he insisted Mercedes to be the second fastest car. Considering that McLaren finished on the podium, that is a tough fact to follow on. But if we consider the average race pace, Toto seems to be right, as Lewis Hamilton edges Lando Norris by a couple of hundredths. This was all down to how good the W14 was on the final stint on low fuel. On the final few laps, Perez's third place was in jeopardy as Lewis Hamilton was at times more than half a second faster through an entire lap. This shows how much inconsistent the W14 is, as a varying fuel load altered the car's balance to the driver's favor. Mercedes heads, including its drivers, have talked a lot about this inconsistency factor within the W14. While previously it was down to the setup of the car at various instances, this time the fuel load actually helped with the car's balance, which is not normal. From all what we have seen, the Mercedes car has been very consistent over the entire race stint, but not last weekend. This depicts two things. One is that the W14 chassis is not up to its mark. Second is, Mercedes still haven't yet understood the current set of technical regulations properly. The second is what I would side with the most, considering how much behind Red Bull the W14 is. If you recall on the season start, Red Bull team boss Christian Horner expected Mercedes and Ferrari to make huge strides and be close to them by the season's halfway point. But now, it seems though Mercedes are working on very slowly, while Ferrari seems to have lost the plot completely. The first problem the Silver Arrows have to tackle is the inconsistency of their beast. That could be what is preventing Mercedes from unlocking more performance out of their concept. Toto Wolff believes that the new ground effect cars as a whole are inconsistent, but the Red Bull car should be an exception. The McLaren also now would join that list with Red Bull, as the MCL60 seems to be performing consistently through varying tracks. Mercedes have planned upgrades for the upcoming races before and after the summer break. But when talking about how much gains and improvements the team will be able to make, the team's star driver was cautious with his words. Asked about why it was taking so long for Mercedes to unlock the downforce gains that it needs to close that gap to Red Bull, Hamilton explained that there were some extremely complex airflows at play that the team needed time to understand, as he went on to evaluate. Anything's possible, but I don't think we have a plan of that sort of leap in place at the moment. The thing we can't see is the airflow throughout the car. That is just limited when you look in the wind tunnel because there's only a certain amount you can move the car. There's simulations with the new rules that we have, and all the new tools we have had to create and understand the flow structures underneath the car. All those vortices would blow your mind if you saw what's happening underneath the car, which is a lot different to the previous generations of cars. Working through that just takes time. Aerodynamics play a key part in modern Formula 1 cars. Every decision the team makes, let it be upgrades of incremental changes, aerodynamics is the key part which should have the most importance on. But what does it mean for the development rate? Andrew Shovlin, the trackside engineering director of Mercedes, talked about how that, combined with the cost cap rules, are limiting Mercedes on reeling in Red Bull's advantage, like they have done in the past. The way the rules are, if you launch a competitive car in a cost cap, it is quite difficult for teams to catch up. Because if you've got a competitive car, you don't need to be throwing updates at it week in, week out. I mean, that's what we're working to achieve at the moment. They're coming, we're trying to get them on the car as quickly as we can, which is why some of the bits were in Silverstone. But the fact is, you can't design your car for every single circuit. So you're seeing the nature of the corner speed, whether ride is a big factor can come into it, whether it's an overheating circuit, or one where it's tricky to get the tires to work, whether the balance is more oversteery, all of those things will change the relative performance. And then on top of that, you've got a pretty aggressive development race going on, and you can see that with the steps that Williams made, that McLaren made, where people are bringing a lot of performance and the phasing of that is starting to juggle the order a bit. This certainly is not good news for the Silver Arrows. While they are struggling to understand the new technical regulations and how their concept works, rivals and especially customer teams have gained better knowledge, which is why they are ahead in the playing field. But what could the team do moving forwards? Can they consolidate second place in the constructors for the rest of this season? What are your expectations moving forwards from the Brackley-based squad? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section down below. We'd love to discuss it with you. And on your way down, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get notified of our future uploads, to keep yourselves up to date about the 2023 Formula 1 season.